All right, let's get this party started. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you all are having a great Cisco Live. I am Thomas Renzi, and I'm a consulting engineer with Cisco Advanced Services. Welcome. This is DEVNET-1797, Introduction to Automating ACI with Ansible. Just a show of hands, just so I can get a read from all of you. How many of you are deploying or have deployed ACI? Wow. Well, thank you. How many of you also have Ansible experience? That was a little sort of halfway we're putting up, sort of thinking about it maybe. Okay, good. Well, we're going to cover all of that in the next 45 minutes. So we're going to cover an overview of Ansible, what it is, as much as we can. We're going to automate some playbooks with ACI. So showing you how you can use Ansible to automate things that you want to do with ACI. And then we're going to cover the ACI REST module. And the ACI REST module is something interesting that you're going to want to think of because there is some limitations with Ansible modules with ACI, and I'll talk about that obviously in a bit. So I want to cover the ACI REST module. You can join the discussion if you have Cisco WebEx Teams installed. You can absolutely, please send me questions. I won't be moderating it right at this moment, but you can certainly send me any questions. I will be answering it all the way through June 18th. And you can also come and see me in the WISP area. I'm also working there as well. So we can definitely talk more Ansible with ACI. So when we're talking about automation, and automation is sort of a hot topic for us, right? That's all we hear about. Automation, automation, automation. What does automation mean to us? Well, it's the use of tools and instructions to create a repeated process to replace manual work that we would do, right? These tools can conduct tasks on systems to automate a process with minimum administrator intervention. And there's advantages to automation, certainly speed, efficiency, and then, of course, an associated costs. So where is the benefit around ACI? Well, ACI today for configuration, as a lot of you are aware, it's point and click via the GUI interface. So we can do one configuration at a time. I can configure a tenant. I can configure this portion of it, right? But what if you have repetitive tasks? If you find yourself doing things over and over? Also, what if you're looking at deployments and configurations in scale? The GUI certainly doesn't lend itself to doing those types of things. So let's take a look at a three-tier application with the APIC GUI, right? Have you all configured three-tier applications in your environment? You have? Yes. Okay. Well, generally we start with creating a tenant. So there's a separate window just to create a tenant. Logical container for objects and policies. Well, if we're going to create a tenant, we're going to have one or more VRFs associated with that, right? Well, if we're going to have one or more VRFs and we're going to add subnets and IPs to it, well, we're going to create one or more bridge domains. Well, if we're going to have one or more bridge domains, then we're going to have to configure the associated subnet on those. Okay, now that we have all this infrastructure in place, we want to model our application. So we're going to create an application profile. That's another window. Well, if we have an application profile, then we'll need to create EPGs. So if we use the typical web app DB, those are three more windows that we need to do to create a three-tier application. And since ACI leverages a whitelisting model, well, we need to configure some contracts that are associated with those EPGs to allow them to communicate. So in this case, that's two more windows just to create the contracts. Well, we have to specify what's in those contracts and what we want to allow to communicate. So we have to create contract subjects and any associated filters for what ports. That's 12 windows just to configure one three-tier application. And by the way, it could be even more windows if we need to create more EPGs, more VRFs, or more bridge domains. So is there a better way to do this? I think there is, and it's with Ansible. So let's take a look at Ansible. What is Ansible? It's an open source automation, configuration, and orchestration tool. Runs on most flavors of Unix or Linux for the control system. I will talk about what the control system is shortly. Windows is not supported, but Windows can be managed by Ansible. It can manage different systems. Now, the focus of my talk, of course, is ACI, but if you have other types of Cisco infrastructure in your environment, you can manage it with Ansible. So if you have iOS, NXOS, iOS XR, and you can even go above and beyond that. There are Ansible modules that cover other vendors, but this isn't other vendors live. This is Cisco live. So that's what we have here. The current version as of right now is 2.5. I believe it is 2.5.2. I believe it's 2.5.3. 2.5.3 might be the latest version. 2.5.2 is what I have installed on my control system. ACI support is relatively new. It came in 2.4. It is agentless, so it doesn't require us to install software on the target systems that we want to manage because it leverages a push model. So from our control systems, we can push the configuration and policies out to those target systems that we want to manage. It's idempotent. That means I can run the same plays and tasks every time and I will get the same result. So it has idempotency. It is YAML-based, yet another markup language, or YAML 8 markup language, depending on who you talk to, right? It also leverages the existing APIC REST API interface that you're already using with the GUI. So it leverages that. Well, what makes up Ansible? Well, you have the control machine, and that's used to configure policies and control and automate the target systems. The target systems being the systems that we want to actually control and automate through Ansible. In our case with ACI, that is going to be our APICs. We are going to push our policies and automation out to our APICs that we want to push policies to. Inventory files, they're just text-based files to tell Ansible what those target systems are that we want to push those policies and configuration and plays out to. They can come in INI and YAML. So YAML is going to be a recurring theme, and it really is what makes Ansible very, very easy to use and configure. Playbooks are just a series of plays or automation tasks that we want to perform on the target systems, also YAML-based as well. And then modules are just reusable scripts that we want to perform the tasks on those target systems in Ansible. So here's an example of some Ansible inventory files. On the left, you can see a YAML-based inventory, and on the right side, you can see an INI inventory file. You'll notice that I actually have groupings, so you can actually have a single host that you want to automate, but I can also group them. So for example, I've got my 3 APICs, and they're associated with Fabric 1. So I can actually use inventory files to group things together. Now, for the more security conscious among you, and I'm sure everybody is security focused and conscious, you'll notice that I specified my actual admin username and password. So that shows up in the clear so you can actually see that information. There are ways to secure Ansible and Ansible inventory files using Vagrant or signatures as of 2.5 with ACI. I won't cover those, but just know you can actually use this as you're starting to get up to speed on Ansible with ACI. You can certainly use that and then start to look at things such as Ansible Vault, or you can use signatures if you want to secure some of your inventory files. So Ansible playbooks, just a series of plays or tasks to be performed on the target systems. Built on YAML, it requires proper indentation. If you're not indenting your files, and for those of you that are already working with Python, you are already aware of this. So it does require indentation. You'll see in an example that I'm going to show shortly. All YAML files start with 3 dashes in the beginning of it, and it can apply specific roles to specific targets. So if I want to run a set of tasks on one specific set of targets and another set of tasks on another, you can actually apply different target-specific tasks. Tasks are executed in order. So order is important, and it will execute those tasks in the order that you have it configured in your playbook. So just something to note as well. So I'm going to put an example playbook because I've been talking about how easy YAML is to read. And I'm going to leave it up there. Even if you've never seen a YAML file, just take a few seconds to take a look at it so you see it. Pretty easy, right? There's nothing that I have up here that where you wouldn't see this and know exactly what I'm doing with this playbook. Now, having said that, what does this all mean? Well, as I mentioned before, all YAML files start with the 3 dashes. If we want to provide comments, we can actually use the pound or hash symbol. So we can specify and be descriptive about maybe what this playbook is doing. What is the name of the playbook that we have here and we have configured? We can specify that there. The host file are the hosts that are going to be read in from the inventory file that we specify. It can be the groups of hosts that we specified, or it can actually be an individual host here as well. The connection I'm specifying is local. So I'm going to run my playbooks on my local control system that I'm running this playbook on. If I want to learn more information about the target systems that I am attempting to automate and configure with ACI, I can gather facts about those target systems. Now, generally, I don't gather facts or provide you a wealth of information, but for what we're trying to do as far as automating process within ACI, generally, I don't gather facts, but it is available to you if you want to do that. You will notice the indentation. So here is where I just want to point out here that you have the indentation. So please make sure you have proper indentation with your Ansible playbooks. And here you'll notice that you have the indentation with the module name, and you also have indentation here as well. So just be cautious of indentation within your YAML files when using Ansible. So let's continue on. So here are my tasks, and my tasks are going to be listed in order. In this case, I've got a task name, create a tenant. Seems simple enough. This is the module that I'm going to leverage to create my tenant. It is the ACI_tenant module. Here is the configuration for authentication in order to apply my modules and policies against those target systems. Now here you can specify individual host name, username, and password. Here I'm actually specifying from my variable, from my inventory file, the host name, username, and password. So this information is actually going to be read in from the inventory file that I specified before. But you can actually specify, too, the actual host name listed here. The beauty of that is, and this uses variable substitution. I will talk about variable substitution in a little bit. Here, I can make the changes on my inventory file, and it automatically gets populated here. So you don't have to worry about making changes to configuration each time. What is the actual tenant here? Well, we're at Cisco Live, so I'm going to go ahead and specify Cisco Live. That's the name of the tenant that I'm going to configure on my Apex. The description of what the task is doing. Now, this isn't necessarily a description. You can use it as a description for what the task is. But if the object supports a description field, this is what's going to be populated on the APIC for that object in the description field. So that is what that does. If I want to do any certificate validation, I can specify that here. And then the state of present. The state of present tells Ansible that if this is not configured on the target system, in this case our Apex, go ahead and configure it. If it is present on the target system, then I'm not going to make any modifications or any changes to the target system. It's already there. Two other states I want to point out that I think you should be aware of that are interesting. One, well, I can configure a state of present to configure things, then I must be able to configure absent to remove it. So if I want to remove this Cisco Live tenant, I can specify the state of absent, and it will remove that configuration. The other interesting thing that you can do with state with Ansible modules is query. So if I want to query my Apex to see if there's a tenant Cisco Live out there, or remove this configuration, I can query my Apex to see all tenants or all contracts or all EPGs on those target systems. So just some interesting things you can do with state with Ansible. So what are Ansible modules? So reusable scripts that perform certain tasks on those target systems. We looked at creating a tenant before, right? But you can also use it to create other types of objects like BDs, VRFs. They're already installed when you install Ansible, so there's no need for you to install additional software to get support as newer modules come out. Each time you upgrade to a newer version of Ansible, any new modules associated with that are all automatically installed. They're written in Python, so if you are already familiar with writing scripts in Python, you can develop your own modules if you like, Ansible modules with Python. There are over 50 modules as of 2.5. I believe it's 51 modules. It's over 50. 51's over 50, right? So there's over 50 modules as of 2.5 within Ansible. And if you want to see all the Ansible modules that are available on your control system, you can run the Ansible-doc-l command. And if you want to see the ACI specific ones, you can use this grep command on your control system. So if I put up an example of this, you can see this on one of my control systems, run the Ansible-doc command, -l, and I'm going to grep for ACI, and it's going to give me all of the ACI modules that I have available. By the way, there are over 50 ACI modules. There are over 450 modules, inclusive of ACI, in Ansible. So lots of modules to do lots of things, to do lots of automation. Okay, I've listed all these modules. Well, what if I want to know more information? What if I want to know what I can do with the ACI EPG module? Well, I can run the same Ansible-doc command against the ACI EPG module. And it will provide me more information with not only what this module does, it also lets me know what is mandatory. What is going to be required from Ansible for that module that I have to have in my task? The other thing it allows you to do, is it gives you example configurations. So for each of the modules that you have out there, it provides you example configurations so you can actually start automating right away. You can look at each of these individual modules. Oh, I can copy this configuration, and now I can make some changes, and now I can have a task that covers EPGs, whether it's creating EPGs or whatever, modifying existing EPGs that you already have. So let's look at automating some playbooks with ACI. So running an ACI playbook, so you can run the Ansible command. Running the Ansible command will allow you to run commands on those target systems, individual commands. So for example, in this case, on my target system, using a username of admin, asking for a password because I actually have a password in clear text in my inventory file, I can check simple things like uptime. How long has my target system been up for example? But for us, we're probably looking at automating multiple things within ACI and on our Apex. So we're going to run the Ansible-playbook command. Now, by default, inventory files are read in etc Ansible hosts. If we want to specify a host file that we've configured, you're going to use the -I command. Then we could specify a local inventory file and then the playbook that we want to run. So in this case, I'm going to run my Ansible-playbook-I, and I created an inventory file called hosts, and then against my tenant.yaml file. And my tenant.yaml file just actually creates a tenant called Cisco Live, and this is the same playbook that I had showed you before. So let's run our playbook. So I'm going to run the Ansible-playbook-I command that I specified before. So Ansible starts the play, and it goes through the actual playbook and then all the individual tasks. Now with the create tenant, all I have is just the one task, creating a tenant. It lets me know what's been changed and what's been changed on the target system that it read from the host file. And then at the end of it, it lets me know via a play recap what that target system was, how many changes it's made, and if those changes were okay. If there were failed tasks, so if there was a problem with one of your tasks or plays within your playbook, it will actually show up here. So it'll let you know where it's failed. And if there's multiple tasks, you can actually see as it runs what task it's failed on. So you can go back and actually look at that task and see what the problem was around that. So it provides you some information, easy to understand information around what it's doing with your playbook. But if you want to see more information, you can use the -V, -3Vs, or -4Vs, depending on how much verbose output you want to see from Ansible as you're running your playbooks. One other thing, too, I just want to go back to, if there are any failed tasks, so if you have a playbook with multiple tasks, with doing something with ACI, it will skip over some of those tasks that have failed. So it will skip and will continue running all of the individual tasks in your playbook. If it doesn't stop if it comes across a failed task or a failed play within your playbook. So let's rerun our command with the -V so we can see a little bit more verbose output. So in this case, it's going to rerun my Ansible-playbook command. I'm going to specify more verbose output. So in this case, it provides a little bit more output, right? So in this case, I can see that Ansible recognized that I do not need to make any changes on the target system because that tenant that I created previously was already there. The other thing you will also notice too is that in the play recap, on my target system, you'll notice that even though my task was okay, I'm not going to make any changes, nor do I need to make any changes on the target system. And then, of course, logging into our APIC, we can actually verify that. So now here's the new tenant that I created, Cisco Live. And then remember the description field I identified? Well, that's where it shows up. So now we can populate the description field of those objects that we configure in Ansible. Well, that's good, right? Okay, let's take a look at a more complex playbook. Because creating tenants with an APIC GUI, that's fairly easy to do. But what about more complex playbooks? What about more complex things that we want to do? So we looked at a simple playbook, creating a tenant, right? Great. What about larger tasks? What about deployments at scale? Are there ACI tasks that you as you're administering ACI that you find yourself doing on a day-to-day basis? Maybe there is. Let's take a look at a 3-tier application. So in my 3-tier application, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to create a tenant called DEVNet. I mean, we're in DEVNet, so lack of imagination on my part. I can create a new VRF, a new bridge domain, both DEVNet VRF and DEVNet BD. I can create an application profile, DEVNet-AP, my 3 EPGs, web, app, DB, and then I've got 2 contracts, web to app, app to DB, with the associated filters, HTTP and TCP for SQL and TCP port 80. So I'm going to create all of this with one playbook. Before I get to that, I want to talk about variables, and we talked about it before within the play that we ran before, creating the tenant. So we can leverage variables. It uses Jinja 2 templating. If you're already familiar with using Jinja 2, you'll actually see that it uses Jinja 2 templating. So I can specify a variable section in my playbook where I say my tenant is DEVNet, and then I can call that variable later on in my tasks, and it will substitute DEVNet for each instance of what we identified here. The beautiful thing about this, if something is beautiful with Ansible and ACI, I think it's beautiful. The beautiful thing is I can modify these variables, and I can make a process repeatable. So now if I have something where I'm creating contracts or creating multiple 3-tier applications, I can substitute these variables, rerun my playbook, and then I'm done. So it truly becomes a repeatable process. The modules we're going to use, these are the list of modules that we're going to use with my 3-tier application. So everything from an ACI tenant all the way to binding an ACI EPG to a contract. So rather than going through slides, I'm going to actually go through a live demo so you can actually see it run live. Okay. So just give me a moment. I'm going to go ahead and log into my APIC. And then while that is logging in, think about it. Okay. So this is my control systems. Now, for some of you that have control systems that are running Mac, you can actually use that as a control system. I just created a VM here with CentOS because I wanted to play around with it and keep it separate from what I have for my work laptop. But you can absolutely use a Mac as your control system. Certainly can. Can we log into here so we can see the demo? All right, so I've got here are all the scripts that I have. Let's take a look at the 3-tier application for a moment. So here's my 3-tier YAML. So you can see that I have the same configuration that I showed you previously. That hasn't changed, including the host that I'm going to run this playbook against. So here is my list of variables. Now, one thing with variables that I want to let you know, you can have variables either in your playbook, or you can actually have your variables in your inventory file. Just be careful because there is variable precedence on where those variables are placed, but you can actually have them in both places. You can identify those. So here I'm going to specify my tenant, my VRF, all the information that's going to actually get substituted down. So if I look now at my tasks, so here is my DEVNet tenant here. That was up here. I bypassed it. Here is my DEVNet VRF, my DEVNet bridge domain. So you can see all the configurations that I want to do on the target systems I have specified in my playbook. All the way down through the contracts, my filters, all the way down. The playbook itself is a shade under 300 lines. Now you may say to yourself, wow, that's a lot of configuration. I'm going to talk about another way that we can do this briefly that won't encompass having a 300 line playbook. So let's go ahead and run our playbook. So we're going to run the Ansible -playbook command. I'm going to specify that, and I'm going to use my local host file. I'm not going to use the default Etsy Ansible host. So I'm going to specify a local host file that I've created, and then I'm going to run that on my 3-tier YAML file, okay? And I'm not going to specify any verbose output for now, but I have another playbook that I'm going to specify with so you can see it. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. So here we go. So it's going to go through and create your tenant. So now you can track every task that Ansible is going through so you can see the process of what it's doing. So in this case, it's going through creating the DEVNet application profile, EPGs. So it's running through each task and lets you know where it is. So you can actually watch the progress as it's configuring things on your target apex. Takes about 20 seconds to complete. a lot shorter than what you would need to do if you were using the APIC GUI, as some of you are already aware. So now we're creating our secondary contract here as well. So we are done. So if we look at the play recap, on the target system that I ran this playbook against, you can see that I made 20 changes on the target system, and all 20 of those were correct. If any one of those had failed, it would show up here, and we would have actually seen when it ran through that task. We would have seen that. And we have to be very careful with that. One thing to note with tasks, if the tenant task, for example, if there's a problem with the tenant task, well, if I have a problem with creating my tenant, any associated objects that require that are dependent upon tenant, they're not going to be created as well. So no VRFs, no bridge domains. So just note that even though it will skip over failed tasks, just note that it could impact other things within your playbook. So let's take a look at what it did on the target APIC. So if I look at my tenants here, as soon as I click on it, oh, let me close that window out. And I'm going to go ahead and click on my tenants. So you can see it created a DevNet tenant here, configured by Ansible, and then at a high level you can see there's one bridge domain, one VRF, and 3 EPGs. So if I drill down into DevNet, I just want to show you everything that it created so you can see that out there. You know what? I'm going to actually go ahead and delete this. I don't want to rerun it. I want you to see it being created live. So hopefully you don't mind me going ahead and deleting it and rerunning it. All right, so, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and delete it, right? And then I'm going to rerun it, and I want to see you guys to see it actually populate. So let me rerun my playbook. I'm going to rerun my playbook. It's going to go through all the plays. And what's going to start to happen is you should see it populate and create DevNet right there. So you can see it. So I'm just going to move this window over just a little bit so you can see it. Okay? And when it's done running through the playbook, again, now if I reran this playbook before I removed the tenant, it wouldn't make any changes. You would see 20 okay, but it would change would be 0 because I'm not making any changes on the target system. So as it goes through, it should run through and it'll run successfully just like it did before. On the target system, these are all the modules, by the way, that it's running through, the modules that I specified before. So if I go into DevNet, and I take a look at all the things that it's created. So obviously it created the tenant DevNet. If I look at my application profiles, there's my DevNet AP, and here I can actually see my EPGs that I've created, though very small. Let me see. Let me just try to increase that so you can see it here. So I'm going to increase this so you can see the 3 EPGs, app, web, DB, and then my 2 contracts. So all that was created with the Ansible playbook that I just ran before. So let's take a look at other objects that I created. So if I look at networking here, and if I look at bridge domains, well, there is the bridge domain that I configured in there. Within the bridge domain, I configured a subnet. So here is that subnet. So I'm going to go ahead and show you under subnets. You can see the individual subnet that I created. So I actually applied a subnet to that bridge domain. You can also see the VRF that I created here, DevNet VRF. And then you've seen it already, but if I look at contracts, you can see the contracts that I've created here and the associated subjects, as well as the filters. So here are the filters associated with those subjects. So all of that configuration that would have taken a minimum of 12 windows we saw before was created with one playbook. So pretty interesting. So the question that you may have, of course, is, well, that's also a close to 300-line playbook. Is there a way that we can sort of break this down? And there is, using Ansible roles. Ansible roles uses a predefined directory structure and allows you to break down your Ansible playbooks into smaller tasks and any variables associated with those tasks. Now, since my session is only 45 minutes, I wanted to include a slide just so the question gets answered, if you had that question, on can I break down my playbooks, larger playbooks, into much smaller tasks? And indeed you can, using Ansible roles. Ansible Galaxy is a community contribution of roles. So maybe you want to go out and find out, maybe somebody else has already created a 3-tier application with ACI and Ansible. So you can go out to galaxy.ansible.com and you see if anyone in the community, or maybe you want to contribute your own playbooks and roles out to the community. So this is where you can actually go find more information around roles. So let's talk about the ACI REST module. So hopefully you're starting to see that, yeah, Ansible is a great solution to automate ACI tasks in my environment. And ACI modules can do most common things. Most common things. Lots of modules as of 2.5, as I pointed out before, and modules are added to every version. So every new version that comes out, it usually adds one or more modules to it. So more and more things that we can do with Ansible and ACI. Now, modules aren't one-to-one with everything you can do within ACI. So you can't do everything. That's one of the downsides with Ansible with ACI right now. Also, how many of you are using JSON or are you any of you using XML or JSON with Postman? A couple of you are. More of you are. Yeah, okay. Well, what do you do with your scripts that you've created, right? If you probably already have a library of XML and JSON. You don't want to go back and recreate the wheel, right? Well, this is where the ACI REST module comes in. Provides direct access to the and management to the APIC REST API. You can use your existing XML and JSON, and yes, even YAML files to configure your APICs. Variables work with the ACI REST module if you so use that. And you can actually start to build a library by grabbing configurations either via the APIC or the API inspector if you already worked with the API inspector. The API inspector will allow you to see what configurations go to the APIC REST API, either JSON or XML. So here's an example of using an ACI REST module to create a tenant here. So in this case, I'm calling my tenant Ansible-JSON, right? So in this case, I have the full path to the actual object. I'm using a post method. That means I am actually posting my configurations or configuring it on the target APICs. My content, here is my JSON content. It can be XML. If you're more inclined to use XML, you can use XML. And then, of course, here we have validate certs. Now, you may say to yourself, well, Thomas, that's great, but we already have a module that covers creating tenants, right? We already have something that covers that. So let's look at something where we don't have a module, the miscabling protocol. Now, I'm not sure if any of you are using the miscabling protocol. It is considered a best practice in your fabrics. But there's no module for this. And I'm not necessarily using this because I want you all to run out and configure it. You should. It's a best practice. But just to give you an example of something where we don't have an Ansible module pre-set up to do something with ACI. So in this case, with the miscabling protocol, as you know, ACI today does not support spanning tree protocol or any BPDUs. LLDP can handle instances if I interconnect these leaf switches here in yellow. LLDP will take care of any loops that I may introduce into my ACI fabric. Well, what if I have an intermediate switch that's misconfigured via static path binding, or just a misconfigured VLAN in general? There's currently no Ansible module to cover that, and it's considered a best practice to configure it. So what I can do is I can go out to the APIC, and I can grab the associated information that will allow me to add this as a task in my Ansible playbook. So here's just the configuration that I grabbed from the APIC. The MCP instance policy, that's just the object that I want to configure on my target systems. I'm going to actually enable it. By default, it's disabled. I can specify a description to populate the description field. My distinguished name is also defined here, and then any loop protection action, which is a configuration I could do, I can specify that the port should be disabled. So here is the configuration before we make any changes. So here you can see that it's been disabled, no port disabled, and then, of course, nothing configured on here. So let's also run through a demo on this as well, just so you can see. So I'm going to go ahead, and you can find your MCP configuration, if you're interested, under Fabric, Access Policies, and then Global Policies. So here, you can see my MCP instance policy, the default policy for MCP. So you can see it configured here, and it's just a standard configuration. Now, let's look at my playbook here. So now if I look at my playbook, and I named it mcp.yaml, standard Ansible playbook with my YAML configurations to begin with, and then my tasks. Here is my path to the object that I want to configure. I'm going to post that configuration to my target Apex. Here is all the content that I'm going to configure on those target systems. So now I'm going to rerun this playbook using the Ansible playbook command. And this time, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to actually run this with as much verbose output so you can actually see what you would see if you actually put the 4 V's out there. So I'm going to go ahead and run my playbook. So it's going to run through, and as you can see, there's a lot more output than what we had certainly just running the playbook and just with the 1 V. So I'm going to quickly scroll up. I'm not going to go through each lines, but you can see here, you can see all the additional information that Ansible outputs when you run your playbook. So if you just want to see what Ansible is doing on your target systems, you can actually run the more verbose output, and you can actually see that. So now, it's made those configuration changes. Let's go back to my APEC. So now, it has actually made the configuration. I've actually populated the description field, configured with Ansible. You can obviously make that anything you want. I have enabled that feature, and now I've set the loop protection action to port disable. So it's not so much that we have enabled MCP, you should, it's a best practice. It's now I'm not limited to 50 modules for things I want to automate with ACI. That's what you can do with the ACI REST module. Any questions? I'm going to pause here. I haven't asked for any questions. Yes. Yeah, no, that's actually the path to the object that we're trying to configure. That's what that path is. So if you're looking at it in the APIC, that's actually the path to the object itself, the object that we want to configure. You can do some variable substitution around that, but generally it's just the path to the object that we want to configure using either JSON or XML with ACI REST. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wrap it up. And so hopefully, we've been here for 45 minutes. I can talk about Ansible for a week. We don't have a week. We have a party to go to tonight. But certainly, hopefully you see some of the benefits of using Ansible with ACI, that you'll want to look at it yourself. Maybe there are tasks that you want to automate. It is very easy reading and writing inventory playbooks. Very easy using YAML. No special programming skills are needed. Can I actually say that here in DevNet? No special programming skills needed. Can I actually say that? You know, I didn't think about that when I actually put that bullet on here, and I don't see the DevNet guys, so we'll just keep that kind of between us, but no special programming skills needed. It certainly helps. If you have Python experience, right, you can write your own modules, but it's not required. If you come from a traditional configuration-based type of environment like I do, then Ansible feels very it feels more like what you usually do. Modules come pre-built with most common tasks. And for any common tasks that we don't have, the ACI REST module, if you have the XML or JSON configuration, can pretty much cover it. So references, if you want more information, the Ansible documentation to understand how to create those playbooks, how to create those inventory files, and do other things such as roles. The Ansible ACI specific documentation you can find at that link. The additional information around ACI modules, you can run the Ansible-doc command to find out more information on modules. You can also check out this website too. It provides you the same information, including configuration samples. And then, of course, I would be remiss being here in DevNet without pointing out that DevNet, or developer.cisco.com, has a lot of great information on Ansible with ACI. Please complete your session evaluation. We'd love to hear more feedback on more content around Ansible with ACI. Maybe you want to hear some additional information on how to do things, for sure. And then, of course, if you want to continue your education at the Learning Labs here in DevNet, now we only have a half a day, I guess, now, but if you're interested in trying this out for yourself, it's one thing to hear me up here going through slides and even demoing it, but I think it's easier if you're actually doing it yourself. So, in the Learning Labs over back there, the DevNet folks have a lot of great labs that cover this. In the walk-in self-paced labs, which is directly past DevNet over there, we actually have a lab that covers configuring Ansible or using Ansible with ACI. So if you want to actually try it practically in an environment, we have a lab that covers that. MTE sessions, if you want to talk more one-on-one with Ansible and ACI, there's certainly MTE sessions. I want to thank you very much for your time. I hope you all have a great time at the Customer Appreciation event, and I hope you're having a great time at Cisco Live. Thank you very much.